I still remember the way the office looked that night, like it had been transformed into a place I almost didn't recognise. The usually dull beige walls were lined with strings of cheap fairy lights. Someone had brought in a Bluetooth speaker, blasting a mix of holiday pop songs, and there was this strange mix of smells, perfume and cologne, plastic cups filled with wine, and the faint grease of catered appetizers that were already half cold. I wasn't even supposed to go to the party originally. I had told my husband earlier that week I was too tired from work, that I just wanted to stay home and rest. But something in me changed at the last minute. Maybe it was guilt that I rarely supported his company's events. Maybe it was intuition. I honestly don't know. I just remember standing in front of the mirror before leaving, brushing my hair one last time, telling myself it wouldn't hurt to show up for an hour. I had baked a batch of cookies that afternoon and put them in a tin, thinking it would be a nice gesture because I knew people usually brought something to share, and I carried that tin with me as I walked into the office, trying not to feel out of place. The first few moments were exactly what you'd expect from an office holiday party. Awkward laughter, people gathered in little clusters, talking about projects and vacations. A couple of the interns were already tipsy, and I even laughed when one of the managers was trying to balance a Santa hat on his head while dancing. I remember scanning the room for my husband, and at first I didn't see him. So I thought maybe he was in another part of the office or helping set up its conference room, and I felt a little silly wandering around with my tin of cookies like the new kid in school. One of his colleagues, a woman I barely knew, smiled and took the cookies from me, setting them on a table, and asked me how I was doing, making small talk that felt both polite and distant, the kind you give to someone you don't expect to see again for long. I kept looking for him, walking further inside, past the cubicles decorated with strands of tinsel and paper snowflakes, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist in the oddest way, like my body had realised something before my mind caught up. I saw his jacket draped over the back of a chair, the one I had given him for his birthday last year. Dark navy with a little tear on the inside pocket that I had stitched myself, and I felt a weird rush of relief that at least he was there. But then, as I moved closer toward the conference room, I heard this low, muffled laughter. Not the kind of laughter that fills a party, but the kind that belongs to two people, trying not to be overheard. Private and conspiratorial. My pulse quickened for reasons I couldn't name, and I hesitated, hand resting on the doorframe, trying to decide if I was imagining things, but the sound grew clearer, and there was something unmistakable in it, something intimate. My heart was pounding so hard that for a second I thought maybe I should turn back, that maybe I didn't need to know what was behind that door, that maybe ignorance was safer. But then I remembered all the little moments in the past few months that had seemed off, the late nights at work, the distracted answers when I asked him simple questions, the way he sometimes looked away when I caught his eye, and suddenly it all lined up in a way that made me sick. I pushed the door open, slowly at first, hoping I was wrong, praying that I was wrong, but the sight that greeted me will never leave me. My husband was there, and so was our co-worker, the one I had seen 100 times in the hallways, the one I had shared polite nods with, the one whose laugh I could now recognise even in a crowd. They were standing too close, her hand on his chest, his lips dangerously near hers. Both of them caught in that frozen second when they realised they weren't alone anymore. The silence in that room was deafening, like even the music from the party outside had faded into nothing, and all I could hear was my own breath catching in my throat. My husband stepped back so quickly it almost looked like he had been burned, his face draining of colour as if he'd been caught doing something criminal. She, on the other hand, didn't even move at first, just stared at me with this wide-eyed expression that carried no shame. only annoyance that her moment had been interrupted. For a few seconds, none of us said anything, and I just stood there, gripping the edge of the door frame, my body trembling though the room wasn't cold. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the tin of cookies that I'd brought. I wanted to demand an explanation, but all I could manage was a choked-out whisper. Really? That one word felt heavier than any shouting could have been. He tried to say something, stumbling over half-formed sentences. It's not what it looks like, I swear. But those words felt ridiculous, like lines borrowed from a bad TV drama. Of course it was what it looked like. There was no other explanation for the way his hand had been on her waist, for the closeness between them. My eyes darted between the two of them, and memories began flooding my head. Small details I had brushed off before, like the way he suddenly became so invested in helping her with projects. The way his phone seemed to light up with her name more often than seemed normal. The way he had started buying a new cologne he never wore for me. I could feel my chest tightening, not just from anger, but from heartbreak. A physical ache spreading through me that made it hard to breathe. She finally broke the silence, her voice calm, almost mocking. Maybe we should talk about this somewhere else. The arrogance in her tone lit something in me I didn't know was there. I turned to her, my voice shaking but sharper now. You don't get to talk to me like that. Not here, not after this. She looked away, finally, pretending to be interested in her nails, and that tiny gesture made me want to claw at her. My husband reached out as if to touch my arm, but I pulled back instantly, the thought of his skin on mine making me recoil. I glanced at the table behind them, littered with half-empty cups and paper plates, the remnants of a party I no longer cared about, and I realised how surreal this was, how out of place. A celebration had turned into the worst moment of my life. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, stepping backward into the hallway, needing air, needing distance. People outside were still laughing, sipping wine, completely unaware of the disaster unravelling behind the door. I walked past them quickly, keeping my head down, ignoring the curious glances, ignoring the woman who tried to stop me to compliment my cookies. I couldn't stay there another second. The elevator ride down felt endless, each floor indicator lighting up like it was mocking me, and when the doors finally opened to the cold night air, I burst out into the street like I'd been suffocating. The city lights blurred through my tears, and I realised my life had just split into a before and after. I didn't even remember how I got to my car. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the keys twice before finally managing to unlock the door. Sitting behind the wheel, I just stared at the steering wheel for what felt like forever, unable to turn the ignition because I couldn't trust myself to drive. My heart was racing, my chest felt like it was being crushed, and the sound of their laughter kept replaying in my head like a broken record. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window and closed my eyes, trying to breathe, but all I could picture was the look on his face when he saw me. That flicker of guilt mixed with panic. I had always thought if something like this ever happened, I would scream, maybe throw something, demand answers on the spot. But the truth was I was frozen, paralysed by the shock of realising the person I trusted most had betrayed me in the cruelest way. After a few minutes, I started the car and drove home, though the entire drive is a blur, like I was moving through fog. The city lights passed in streaks, and my hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles hurt. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I felt numb. Walking into the house felt like stepping into a crime scene. Everything too familiar yet tainted by what I had just witnessed. The sofa where we had spent lazy Sundays binge-watching shows. The kitchen where I cooked dinners he barely appreciated. The pictures on the wall of vacations and holidays. All of it looked different, like props from a life that wasn't mine anymore. I sat down at the dining table, my coat still on, staring at the empty chairs. I could hear the ticking of the clock at the wall, each second stretching out like an accusation. And I wondered how many times he had lied to me without blinking. My mind kept flipping through memories, trying to find the moment when it all started, when he decided that I wasn't enough. I thought of the nights he claimed to be working late, the mornings he left earlier than usual, the times he seemed distracted, even when I was speaking directly to him. The signs had been there, but I had chosen to believe his excuses, because the alternative was too painful to face. I felt anger rising through the numbness, hot and bitter, but underneath it was something worse. Humiliation. The image of that woman's smug face haunted me. The way she looked at me like I was the intruder, like I was the one interrupting something that belonged to them. It made my stomach twist with rage. I wanted to call him, to demand he come home and explain himself, but I couldn't bring myself to hear his voice. Instead, I sat there in silence, staring at the cookie tin I had carried into that party with so much naive hope. I hadn't even realised I still had it with me until that moment, the lid dented from where I must have clutched it too tightly. I pushed it across the table like it was poison, then buried my face in my hands. My tears finally came. Not quiet sobs, but raw, shaking cries that left me gasping for air. I didn't know how long I sat there like that, only that when the front door finally opened hours later, I felt a new kind of strength settle over me, cold and sharp. When the door opened, I didn't even look up at first. I just listened to the sound of his footsteps as he came inside, slower than usual, hesitant, like he knew he was walking into a storm. I could smell the faint trace of alcohol on his coat when he finally stepped into the dining room, and for a moment we just stared at each other across the table, like two strangers sharing a space neither of us wanted to be in. His mouth opened as if he wanted to speak, but I raised my hand and cut him off before a single word could come out. "Don't," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. That one word seemed to hang in the air, heavier than anything else. He looked exhausted, his tie loose, his shirt wrinkled, but I didn't care. All I could think about was how close he had been to her, how his hand had rested on her waist like it once had on mine. He sat down across from me, and I hated that the sight of him in that chair felt so normal, when everything inside me was broken. "It was nothing," he finally whispered, avoiding my eyes, staring instead at the table like a child caught stealing candy. My laugh came out sharp and bitter, nothing like my usual laugh. "Nothing? That's what you call it?" He tried again, fumbling. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It's just work. We spend so much time together." His excuses were like knives, twisting deeper, every word confirming what I already knew. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms, feeling this strange clarity settle over me. "You think that makes it better? You think that makes me feel less humiliated?" He finally looked up, and the guilt in his eyes almost made me sick. For years I had loved those eyes, trusted them, believed in them. But now they looked foreign, like they belonged to someone else entirely. I wanted to ask him every question burning inside me. How long? Why her? What did she have that I didn't? But I couldn't bring myself to beg for answers I already feared. Instead, I stood up, pushing the chair back with a screech against the floor, and said, "You should sleep in the guest room." His shoulders slumped, but he didn't argue. He just nodded like he had already lost the right to fight me. As I walked upstairs, I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't turn back. My legs were heavy, and every step felt like dragging a weight I hadn't chosen. But I knew if I looked at him again, I might collapse. In the quiet of the bedroom, I locked the door behind me, something I had never done in all the years of our marriage. I lay down on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling in the dark. my mind replaying everything in loops. I wondered if he was lying awake downstairs, rehearsing apologies, or if he was already dreaming of her. That thought burned the deepest. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it finally did, it was filled with restless images of betrayal I couldn't escape. By the time morning came, I had already made a decision I never thought I would have to make. Morning light crept through the curtains, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a punishment. I woke up with a pounding headache, the kind you get after crying too much, and my body felt heavy, like I had aged years overnight. For a moment, I forgot why my chest hurt so badly. And then the memory of the office party came back, sharp and merciless. I sat up slowly, listening to the quiet of the house, and realised he hadn't left yet. I could hear him moving downstairs, the clink of dishes, the faint sound of the coffee machine. The thought of him making coffee like nothing had happened made my blood boil. I stayed upstairs longer than usual, brushing my hair, staring into the mirror at a face that didn't look like mine. My eyes were swollen, my skin pale, and there was this hollow look in my expression that scared me. When I finally walked downstairs, he was sitting at the table, a mug in his hands, staring into it as if it could give him answers. He looked up quickly when he heard me, like he had been waiting for me, rehearsing his words. "We need to talk," he started, his voice low and cautious. I shook my head immediately. "No, not yet. I can't do this right now." I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hand shaking as I held the pot, and sat as far from him as the kitchen allowed. The silence was unbearable, and yet it was better than listening to his excuses. I could feel his eyes on me, studying me, maybe hoping for a sign of forgiveness, but all I felt was anger and disappointment. After a few minutes, I finally spoke, my voice flat. "How long?" He flinched at the question, almost dropping his mug. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "A few months," he whispered, and the words cut through me like glass. My stomach churned, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Months," I repeated, letting the word linger. He nodded weakly, his face full of shame. But I didn't care about his shame. I cared about mine. I had been living my life, trusting him, loving him, while he was betraying me behind my back. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice trembling now, though I fought to keep it strong. He shook his head quickly, desperate. "No, it was a mistake, I swear. I don't want her. I want us." I almost laughed, but the sound stuck in my throat. "You don't get to say that anymore," I whispered. I pushed my chair back and stood up, suddenly feeling like the walls were closing in. I couldn't breathe in that kitchen with him sitting there, pretending he still had a claim to me. I grabbed my coat and keys and walked out the door, ignoring his voice calling after me. The cold air outside hit me like a slap, but at least it felt real. Unlike the lies that had filled my house, I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away before the anger swallowed me whole. I drove without a destination, just letting the roads take me wherever they wanted, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The city was waking up around me, people rushing to work, kids with backpacks waiting at bus stops, couples holding coffee cups and laughing together, and every sight felt like a cruel reminder of the life I thought I had. I ended up at the small park near the library, the one I used to visit when I first moved to the city. I parked the car and sat there for a while, watching the empty swings sway in the cold wind. Finally, I got out and started walking, needing to feel the ground under my feet, needing to move so I wouldn't fall apart completely. My breath came out in visible clouds, and I shoved my hands deep into my coat pockets, trying to stop them from trembling. I thought about calling my best friend, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Couldn't admit that the marriage I had defended so many times was now shattered. Instead, I walked in circles around the path, trying to untangle the storm in my head. Part of me wanted to go back home and throw him out immediately, to pack his things in trash bags and leave them on the porch. Another part of me wanted to crawl back into bed and pretend none of it had happened, to believe his apologies and rewrite the story so that I didn't have to face the humiliation. But deep down, I knew there was no going back. Trust, once broken like that, can't be glued together with weak promises. I sat down on a bench, my eyes burning as tears started to fall again, and I let myself cry openly, not caring if anyone saw. The cold wood beneath me felt grounding, reminding me that at least the world was still solid when everything else felt like quicksand. I thought about the vows we had made, the promises of loyalty and love, and how meaningless they felt now. I thought about all the times I had defended him to friends who hinted that he might be distant, all the times I had silenced my own doubts because I wanted to believe in us. And now here I was, alone on a park bench, while he sat in our kitchen with guilt dripping off him like sweat. The anger rose again, hotter this time, burning away the helplessness. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through our old photos without meaning to, seeing smiles that now looked like lies. I deleted one, then another, and suddenly I couldn't stop, each press of the delete button feeling like tearing down a piece of the illusion. By the time I stopped, my gallery was nearly empty, and I felt strangely lighter. Though my chest still ached, I knew I couldn't make any big decisions right away, but I also knew I couldn't return home yet. I needed time, space, and maybe even a plan for what came next. The cold air bit at my skin, but I welcomed it, because at least it reminded me I was still alive, still capable of feeling something real after so many lies. Eventually I forced myself to leave the park, my legs stiff from the cold, my face raw from crying, but I still wasn't ready to go home. I drove to a small cafe I used to love, the kind of place with chipped mugs and handwritten menus, somewhere that felt safe in its imperfection. I ordered a tea even though I didn't want anything, just so I wouldn't look out of place. And I sat in the corner by the window, staring out at the street while people hurried by. My phone buzzed 3 times in my bag before I even had the courage to look. His name filled the screen, over and over, and each time I hit decline, my heart pounding harder. After the 10th call, I finally turned the phone off, sliding it face down on the table. I couldn't listen to his voice, not yet, not when it still had the power to weaken me. The waitress asked if I wanted a refill, and I shook my head, barely able to muster a smile. She gave me a look, the kind strangers give when they know something is wrong but don't want to intrude. And for some reason that tiny gesture almost undid me. I sat there for hours, watching the steam rise from the mugs of other people, listening to the hum of quiet conversations, and I felt invisible, like a ghost haunting my own life. My mind kept circling back to her face, that co-worker. The way she looked at me like I was irrelevant, like she had already taken my place. The audacity of it made my stomach clench. How dare she? How dare he? I wanted to confront her, to march into the office and expose them both, to make her feel the same humiliation I had felt. But part of me also feared that by doing so, I'd only give her more power, more presence in my story than she deserved. When I finally turned my phone back on late that afternoon, the screen lit up with a flood of messages. His apologies filled the screen, line after line of desperate words. "I'm sorry. Please come home. We need to talk. It was a mistake. Don't throw us away." I read them all, my throat tightening, but I didn't reply. I couldn't. Every word felt hollow, every promise already broken. I paid for my tea and left the cafe. The evening sky already darkening, the streetlights flickering on one by one. Driving home felt like walking into a trap, but I couldn't avoid it forever. When I pulled into the driveway, The house looked the same as always. Warm light glowing from the windows. The kind of picture that used to bring me comfort. Now it felt like a lie. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, before finally forcing myself to step out. The cold air hit my face and I whispered to myself, "You can do this." But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could. When I opened the door, the house was too quiet, like even the walls were holding their breath. He was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the answers were written there. The TV was on but muted, a cooking show flickering in the background, and the whole scene felt surreal, like I had stepped into a life that no longer belonged to me. He looked up the moment I entered, his eyes red and tired, and for a split second I saw the man I had married, the one who used to make me laugh so easily, the one who promised me forever. But the image shattered just as quickly, replaced by the memory of his hands on her waist. "You didn't answer my calls," he said softly, almost like a child. I set my keys on the table, my hands trembling despite my effort to stay calm. "What could you possibly say that would change anything?" My voice was steady, but inside I felt like I was breaking again. He stood up, moving closer, but I stepped back, needing space between us. "It was a mistake," he repeated, his voice desperate now. "I don't love her. I love you. Please don't let this end us." The words felt like sand slipping through my fingers, impossible to hold on to. I shook my head slowly, my throat tightening. "You already ended us the moment you chose her. Do you understand that?" He reached for me, but I pulled away, the thought of his touch unbearable. My chest ached with the weight of it all, but anger gave me strength. "You didn't just betray me, you humiliated me. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room and see your life unravel in front of strangers? To know they'll whisper about me every time they see my face?" He flinched like I had slapped him, but I didn't care. He deserved the sting of every word. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered her smirk, his hesitation when I asked how long, and the pity vanished. "I'll do anything," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Therapy, counselling, whatever it takes." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You should have thought about that before you crossed the line, before you destroyed everything." The silence that followed was unbearable. I grabbed my bag from the chair, not even sure where I was going, but needing to get away again. "I can't look at you right now," I said quietly, almost to myself. His voice followed me as I walked toward the door, breaking and desperate, but I didn't stop. Stepping outside, the cold night air wrapped around me, and for the first time I let myself imagine a life without him. The thought was terrifying, but somewhere deep inside, it also felt like the only way forward. I drove to my sister's house that night, even though it was late and I hadn't called ahead. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions at first, just pulled me into a hug that broke the last bit of strength I'd been holding on to. I cried against her shoulder, the kind of tears that come from deep in your chest, the kind that leave you breathless. She led me inside, sat me on the couch, and made tea while I tried to pull myself together. When I finally told her what had happened, the words tasted bitter, like poison I had to spit out. Her face hardened with every detail, her jaw tight, her eyes fierce. "I always thought something was off with him," she admitted, her voice sharp. "But I never wanted to say anything because you seemed happy. I didn't want to hurt you." Hearing that stung because it confirmed what I had feared, that maybe everyone else had seen what I refused to. She reached across the table and took my hand. "You don't deserve this. Don't you dare think for a second that this is your fault." I nodded, but inside I wasn't sure. I kept replaying every argument we'd had, Every moment I might have seemed distant, wondering if I had driven him to her somehow. My sister wouldn't let me spiral. "No," she said firmly when I voiced my doubts. "He made a choice to betray you. That's on him, not you." Her certainty was something I desperately needed, even if I couldn't fully believe it yet. We stayed up late, sipping tea that had gone cold, talking in circles. I confessed that part of me still loved him, still wanted to believe him, and that terrified me more than anything. She listened without judgment, reminding me that feelings don't disappear overnight, even when someone destroys your trust. When I finally lay down in her guest room, I stared at the ceiling in the dark, my body exhausted but my mind racing. I thought about the life we had built, the plans we had made, and how fragile it all turned out to be. I wondered if he was sitting alone in our house, pacing the floor, or if he was already reaching out to her. The thought made my stomach twist with nausea. As sleep finally crept in, one thought echoed louder than the rest. I had to decide what kind of woman I wanted to be after this. The one who forgave the unforgivable, or the one who found the strength to walk away. The next morning I woke up in my sister's house to the smell of coffee and the sound of her kids laughing in the kitchen. For a brief second, I let myself pretend everything was normal, that I was just visiting for fun. But reality crashed back in as soon as I reached for my phone. More missed calls, more unread messages from him, piling up like debris. I scrolled through them, each one more desperate than the last. Promises, apologies, please. Please come home. I can explain. We can fix this. I'll do anything. My hands shook as I read them. Not because I believed him, but because part of me hated that his words still had the power to stir something inside me. My sister noticed the look on my face when I walked into the kitchen. "He's blowing up your phone, isn't he?" she asked, handing me a mug. I nodded, sipping the hot coffee, letting the warmth burn my throat. "You don't have to answer," she said simply. "Not until you're ready. If you're ever ready." Her certainty steadied me, though the weight of the decision pressed harder on my chest. I spent most of the day helping her around the house, grateful for the distraction, folding laundry, chopping vegetables, laughing with her kids. It all felt like a glimpse of a life untouched by betrayal. But every quiet moment dragged me back into the storm. That evening, when I finally went outside to sit on her porch, I dialed his number for the first time since that night. He picked up on the first ring, his voice breathless. "Thank God. Please let me see you. Let me explain." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "Explain what?" "That you threw away our marriage for someone you barely know. That you humiliated me in front of everyone." My voice shook but grew stronger with every word. He begged, promised again that it was over, that it meant nothing, but the more he spoke, the more I realized he wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for being caught. I told him I needed space, that I didn't want to see him. Not yet. His silence on the other end was heavy, and for once I didn't fill it with forgiveness. When I hung up, I felt shaky, but also strangely powerful, like I had finally taken a step toward reclaiming myself. My sister came out and sat beside me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. I whispered almost to myself, "I don't know if I can ever go back." She squeezed my hand. "Then don't. You get to choose what comes next." For the first time since that night, I let myself imagine a future where he wasn't in the picture. And though it terrified me, it also sparked something I hadn't felt in days: hope. I went back home a few days later, not because I forgave him, but because I needed to face the life I had left hanging in limbo. Walking into that house felt like walking onto a stage where the set hadn't changed but the play was over. Everything was in its place. The couch pillows fluffed, the framed photos on the walls, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air. He was there, sitting at the table, like he had been waiting every second since I left. His face lit up with hope the moment he saw me, but I didn't smile back. I set my bag down and stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "Thank you for coming back," he said quietly, almost like he was afraid his voice would scare me away. I sat down across from him, keeping the table between us, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Did you ever love me, or was it always a lie?" He leaned forward quickly, shaking his head. "Of course I loved you. I still do. I made a mistake. The worst mistake of my life. But that doesn't erase what we had." His words felt desperate, clinging, but they couldn't erase the image burned into my memory. I thought of our wedding day, of the vows we had spoken with such certainty, and how far away that felt now. I thought of the little traditions we had built, Friday night movies, Sunday pancakes, and wondered if they had meant anything to him at all. My voice broke when I said, "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the person I thought I was when I was with you." He looked down, shame painting his face, and for once he didn't try to argue. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down one of the photo albums we had filled together. I flipped through the pages. Vacations, holidays, silly selfies, and every picture felt like a ghost. I closed it with a snap and set it on the table. "This is what you threw away." His eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't let them sway me anymore. I had cried enough for both of us. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said finally, my voice steady. "And I don't know if I even want to try." His shoulders slumped and he whispered, "Please don't end us." But in my heart, I knew it wasn't up to him anymore. The decision didn't come all at once, but like pieces of glass slowly arranging themselves into a clear picture. That night I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing from the guest room. Every sound reminded me of the man I used to love, and every silence reminded me of the woman he had betrayed me with. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep living in this half-life, clinging to something broken just because I was afraid of being alone. I got up early, packed a suitcase with only the essentials, and walked through the house one last time. My fingers brushed over the photos on the wall, the couch we had bought together, the mugs in the cabinet that matched because we thought it was cute at the time. All of it felt like a museum of a marriage that no longer existed. When he woke and saw the suitcase by the door, his face crumbled. He rushed toward me, begging, pleading, dropping to his knees in the hallway, like a man desperate to keep his world from collapsing. "Please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Just don't go," he cried. I looked down at him, and for the first time I didn't feel pity. I felt clarity. "You already made your choice," I said softly. "Now I'm making mine." His tears didn't move me anymore. I picked up my bag, walked past him, and opened the door. The cold air outside hit me like a wave, but instead of breaking me, it revived me. I drove back to my sister's house, and as I pulled into her driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. It wasn't freedom yet, not completely, but it was the beginning of it. In the weeks that followed, I filed for separation, leaned on my family, and started piecing myself back together. It wasn't easy. Some nights I still woke up in tears, missing the man I thought I had married. But with every passing day, the image of him with her became less sharp, less powerful. I poured my pain into small acts of reclaiming myself, signing up for a yoga class, buying fresh flowers for my room, cooking meals just for me, Each step was a reminder that I could build a life without him, and slowly I did. Looking back now, I realised the betrayal didn't just end my marriage, it forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. I had walked into that office party, expecting a night of polite laughter and snacks, and instead I found the truth that would tear my world apart. But in the rubble, I also found myself, and that, more than anything, is what saved me.